Welcome into the Hail Mary podcast, available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and more. Right out of the gate, I have a very special guest joining the program. It's Pat Fischer, a freelance television producer full-time in the Twin Cities area. I was introduced to Pat Fischer from WCCO's Tom Ryther. I was at Vikings training camp, and it was one of the most endearing interactions I've had because Tom came up to me and said, "I have someone I want you to meet." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "He was you back in the day." And I was like, what could that possibly mean? Well, I work at KUIC News now in Mankato as a weekend sports anchor, and Pat Fischer was also a weekend sports anchor way back in the day. But what specifically makes Pat so great is he founded a lot of what I do on a regular basis at my job. For example, Prep Athlete of the Week, where we highlight one or two high school athletes, or Sports Extra on Fridays, where we go all throughout southern Minnesota and get highlights from Friday night football at the high school level. So, Pat Fischer, how are you doing?
I'm doing very, very well. And it was also nice meeting you too, because it's crazy when you work in a small market in the same market. I know exactly what you're going through, and it's so nice for you to tell me all the things that are still continuing around there. And I do check in now and then, but this is great. This is really great for me to be on your show today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It's an honor because, like you said, in smaller markets, everyone knows each other, and to get to kind of meet the line of who was in my position before is great. So a big question I want to ask you right off the bat is a little bit about your background and what got you interested in the television business. I know right now, as a freelance television producer, not so much on camera at all, but you're still in the industry and you know all what goes into it. But what got you to the point of even being in the weekend sports anchor position, or what happened before?
I can be honest with you. When I was 5, 6 years old, I was watching the Super Bowl. The Vikings were in the very first Super Bowl, 1970, and I remember this vividly. Watching this, saying, "I want to do this someday. If I can't be an athlete, I want to be a television broadcaster." And I've always had that in the back of my head. But growing up on the farm and stuff, you kind of like you don't think of it that much. And when I was picking schools in college, I was thinking business, but always in the back of my head is I want to do TV. I want to do TV. And in the end, I just said, I got to do TV. So I chose St. Cloud State because at the time, and still is probably to this day, one of the finest television broadcast schools in the country for that, especially in the Midwest, because back then St. Cloud State was the only person that did TV. All the other colleges never even had programs. So you kind of had to go there if you wanted to be competitive to get your first job. And I have never regretted it. I mean, there's always things, this business can be kind of a retail business. You know that. It's weekends, it's nights. But the excitement of building relationships and meeting people of things that you like always enticed me. Because in the end, it's all about relationships anyway, regardless of what business you're in, but especially in this business. And I always wanted to do sports. I mean, people call me Howard. Yeah, I'm going to date myself, but they called me Howard Cosell growing up because I knew everything and anything about sports, especially Minnesota sports and especially high school sports. I still to this day love the high school scene. It's different now because back then I just couldn't wait to see somebody I heard about. Now we see people all the time. So I was always interested. I read the sports page like a book every day. I'd memorized it. It's just who I was. And I got into it and started working at KYC TV. I was an intern there in '85, and there were 3 or 4 other interns there as well. But because I went to St. Cloud, I had better skill set at that time and got a job there right away and just sort of worked from there. And I stayed there for 10 years in the end.
Well, I think something a lot of aspiring sportscasters that go the local TV route would relate to is having to cover high school sports. And you are at a significant advantage if you have a high IQ for high school sports in that particular area. And it sounds like that's exactly what you were. And that's one of the first things I heard about you. You mentioned reading the sports page as a resource to get to know the teams around you. What else were you doing, and why were you so interested at sports at the high school level?
I never, because when I grew up in a small town, you didn't, in your 2.5 hours from the cities, you grew up, you didn't have a lot of television. You had television, but games weren't on TV like they are now. I could not wait for a Gopher basketball game to be on TV. Only about 65 Twins games were on TV. Now every game is broadcasted. So you watched all that, but in the end, you went to your local games. You went to, if there was a good player, say I'm from Wabasso, right? So if there was a good player in Winthrop, Minnesota, you would figure out a way to go watch that player. I mean, my dad was that way. My dad loved to see, especially basketball. He'd love to go to a game that was featuring a really couple good teams, and he knew I was so interested, he would take me along. So that fostered my love for it, especially local stuff. I was a basketball player in high school, but I loved wrestling and I loved keeping track of the matchups in wrestling. We were such a good wrestling school, and I had such good friends that were great wrestlers that for some reason intrigued me when one of my friends would wrestle someone, and I'm talking about a state champion now, and he will lose to someone else, but that person beat that person he beat. I'm like, how does this happen? So that stuff always intrigued me. And I don't know why it did. It just did. I had 6 brothers. They all were athletes. They all loved sports, but they didn't have the same interest that I had. I love to find out about other people. And to this day, yet, even from a relationship standpoint, I crave to meet people and find out who they are. I just kind of, if someone walks by and I go, who is this person? I want to know who they are. I actually just kind of crave to meet them. And I can't explain it. It's just kind of who we are. And, but I really, when you grow up in a small town and you know all about Southwest Minnesota, because that Southwest Minnesota becomes like the Twin Cities here, it's your area. Um, I just took a liking to it. And by chance, I got an internship in Mankato. It was the one place that took me. So I was very lucky. And it was a big advantage as I was applying for a job there that I knew more about high school sports around there than quite honestly anyone else did. And it's just happened through osmosis and interest.
Well, having that very unique knowledge, not unique, especially in southern Minnesota, but having that knowledge, like you said, will carry you a long way. But work ethic more so is very important in this industry. And I don't think a lot of people, especially as more reporters I see trickle in and more reporters I get to know, the industry isn't a job you can necessarily balance with personal life, with work life. It takes a lot of passion. So your passion drives your work ethic. Describe to me what made you that way, where your work ethic came from. At the beginning of the show, I alluded to some of the programming that you started. All of that takes extra time to think about things. It takes, creativity. And that's in addition to the job that you're already expected to do.
Well, I grew up on a farm, and, you know, I've got 10 brothers and sisters, and we milk cows. So work's always in front of you. So you can complain about it, but it's not going to stop the work, right? You got to do the work. And I learned to work, and you know this as well too. You kind of learn to work without getting paid a lot. I never got paid on the farm when I was on the farm working for my family. It's just how it was, right? But you still had to work, and you still had to take pride in what you did, because in the end, if you did something, it's you. It's a reflection on you. And when I came to KYC TV, the work part has never been, it's the one advantage I think I've always had. I feel I can outwork people because I knew myself a little bit, and you have to be honest with yourself. I kind of knew that I was never going to be a top line anchor because I didn't necessarily have the look for it. I was more interested in meeting people and going out and doing stories than anchoring. So I kind of knew that wasn't going to happen. But when you start working in an area and you really want to serve the people you work for, it used to bother me as a kid growing up in El Paso that KYC TV never covered anything outside Mankato. It actually, it just made me mad actually. So when I got there as an intern, I said, I'm covering the area. I'm going to let people know that we're going to come out and see them. So I started, as a young guy, I said, I'm going out 45 miles to get this game. And my sports director would be like, I said, no. I said, this team deserves to be looked at. They need to be seen. These guys are good. We got to let them know we're here. So, and then when you're out there, you want to treat them right. You want to be fair. You got to report, but you want to do a good job because you want them to watch and you want to be liked and all that. I knew that if there's the one thing that I could do is I could control how much I worked. I can't control if people like me or not. There are people that didn't like me just because I had a receding hairline when I was younger. All that stuff where I wore the wrong tie. You know that. I think women go through that tenfold than what men do, right? There's more expectations for a woman to cover sports than there is for me. But work is something you can control. Talent is something that you have to develop. And I never thought I had the high-end talent to be a lead anchor anyway. So I kind of stuck to, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to serve the community, I'm going to do stories and tell people stories. And it was the work ethic that got me to where I was. It has nothing, the other stuff helps because I was kind of well-versed in a lot of areas, but the anchoring was never probably going to get me to the top. But I knew my work ethic got to be valuable to somebody somewhere in a larger market, because we all strive to get to a larger market because the money is better. And I don't know if the hours are better or not, but it's just like, I always equate it to major leagues, baseball, right? You start in the minors and you work your way up. You just want to get better every day because it's what you love. And the passion has to be there, because if it's not, the business will eat you up, because it is hard. It's weekends. It's not going to weddings when your friends are getting married. It's all that kind of stuff. You just have a lot, and there's a lot to do. People used to tell me when I first got the job, oh, I know sports pretty well. I'm good at sports. I could go on air and talk about sports. And I tell people, I said, how long am I on during the course of a day? 10 minutes? What do you think I do the other 8 to 10 hours? You're working, and I see you doing the same thing. You've got a lot of things going on. And when you're at a smaller market, oh my gosh, you've got a ton. You're always striving to get stuff on the air and working deadlines. It's not easy.
Yeah, when I conduct interviews, I'll always get the comment like, you're going to edit this, right? And I say, only 5% of my job is being here right now. The rest is editing and producing. So you're in luck because I'm going to make this look great. But one really important thing you mentioned was being honest with yourself. And that's not something that's taught in college, is really understanding yourself, knowing your skill sets, and trying to, proceed in a way that benefits those things. So to have that naturally is important, because a lot of times I've seen people aren't honest with themselves. They think they're further along than they are. And that's where some people can get stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So moving on, you had your first job at KEYC. You've done all of these things to prove that you can last in this business, because that's how passionate and hardworking you were. What happened from then on, your first job out of college?
It does come down to relationships. What I did do when I was in Mankato, and which was my first job, I was very lucky that something opened up right after I interned there. They hired me on through December to be kind of a vacation fill over the holiday type person. I was forced to anchor as an intern because they fired the guy that was ahead of me, so the job was open, but they actually hired somebody else, so I didn't get it. So I thought, well, I'm done. Well, then someone else quit, and I wound up doing weekend sports right away. So timing's huge, but the work ethic is important. But what I did do is this, because it's really difficult to get mentoring in small markets if you don't. I had a person that came in that took this first sports job that moved over to the news. He came from a large market. He kind of quit television, wanted to go back to school, but took the weekend sports job as a part-time job while I was going to school. But he was a great news person, and I got so much mentoring from him. He wound up leaving, but what I also learned from him, and what I was always good at, is every Monday and Tuesday, I would take my tapes and I would have meetings with the guys in the Twin Cities. Tom Hanneman, all these guys that were anchoring sports, and they would give me feedback on my tapes, and they would help me learn how to write. So I did a lot of that stuff. But the relationships I built, because I had turned down jobs in other smaller markets because I'm like, well, where's this going to get me? It's not that much different than what I'm doing now. And quite honestly, some of the stuff wasn't the same amount of money. And we know how much money we don't make in this business. And I was, I had in a relationship and all that. But the relationships in the end, and me being in Mankato for as long as I was, and you get to know all the people in the Twin Cities market. When Midwest Sports Channel started, I'd already been talking to them from day one. And I knew the people that were starting it. I knew the people that were involved. And I just kept in contact with them. And I was also, they had to hire someone who could kind of shoot for themselves, write for themselves, and anchor. So I kind of kept telling them, I'm that guy, you know? And in the end, when they finally started the show and went ahead with it, they called me right away. I didn't send a resume tape, none of that stuff. It wasn't done that way. It was done through connections and talking to people and making friendships. So I was very lucky that way too. But in the end, it's what you do. I mean, I was in Mankato for 10 years. That's a long time, Mary, more than I should have been. But because of circumstances, in the end, it worked out. But I had been trying to get out of there. I shouldn't say that I could have gotten out of there sooner, but I always had this in the back of my mind because I knew after doing television news and sports, which as much as I love it and still do, I really wanted to work for an all sports station. Because that time ESPN was getting huge. My final goal was always to be ESPN. But when MSC, a regional sports network where I know everything that's going on, I'm like, oh man, I want this. I'd rather be at MSC or Midwest Sports Channel, which is now Bally, which was Fox before. I wanted to be there because that's local again for me. And I have all the knowledge of the sports industry here in this town. So I kind of put all my eggs in one basket, and I waited for 3 years for that to happen, but it worked out.
Yeah, building those relationships is also a key part that, at least in my college experience, wasn't something that was heavily preached, but it's something that you hope is a natural thing that comes about. Everyone says networking is important, but building those friendships. And that was something I experienced, honestly, for the first time I went to Vikings training camp. I assumed the sports position at my local TV station during COVID. So I kind of got a year of doing a whole lot of nothing.
Tough.
I got to cover national stuff. That's always fun because at a local market, you're covering a lot of local. So to get to talk about the big leagues is always exciting. But the community was great. Right when I arrived with my camera, Tom, the WCCO reporter that we were talking about, Tom Reither, said, do you need me to move over so you can have a better angle? And I'm like, thank you so much. I used his equipment throughout the week. When I was doing a stand-up, you and multiple other people said, do you need help with your stand-up? Because, we know how to do this. And I'm like, no, it's okay. I don't want to inconvenience anyone. But truly, that's the exciting stuff that a lot of aspiring reporters that I know don't expect when they go to those big opportunities. And it also reminds you have to be friendly. You have to look out for one another because that's the environment. And if you're not going to include yourself in that, then you might build your own reputation for yourself.
Well, and that's important for you. As important as it is for you to cover local sports, it's very important for you to get up and try and do Vikings camp. I mean, it used to be Vikings camp was in Mankato and those people came to you. And it's important for you as a professional to see how bigger stations do it. Now, you talked about WCCO. When I went to MSC, we worked in the same building when I was at Midwest Sports Channel. We worked right next to each other. When I got to MSC, WCCO had 13 bodies in their sports department. 13 people covering sports. They had 4 photographers, 4 producers, 4 on-air people, and 1 overall person that did a lot of the scheduling and everything else. They now have 3. And the important part for you and for people like us back in the day to be able to have that experience with these people in the field is that you sort of find out if you belong or not. And one of the first things, because I never really fully knew if I did or I didn't, because it took so long for me to get to a large market. But no more than a week that I was there and I watched how people do things and work and how things are done, I realized right away, I do belong here. I should have been here long before that. I'm not being cocky. It's just that you don't know. You say, well, I can do this because when you're in a small market, you don't know. You think you can and you want to be, but you realize, cripes, these guys have so much more stuff done in a day. It's hard to get stuff done in a day in a small market, you know? And that's why it's important for you to continually have that experience as well, because you've got to meet those people, get to know them, let them know who you are as a person, not as an on-air person. That'll come later, because that still all matters. Because you can say what you want, people still want to hire people who fit the department, who are willing to work, right? They want to know that in the end. All the other stuff, they're going to see what you do on air and everything else. They know that. You wouldn't be in the room. They wouldn't ask you to come up there and interview or anything like that if they didn't see that part of it. They're trying to find out who you are, and how you're going to fit in. And it's like a team, right? It takes such good chemistry to be in TV with all your people. Like when I was at Mankato and we had really, really good people who were aspiring to do better, it's amazing how much better our product was because we worked for each other. We weren't being selfish. We worked for each other. We got things done because, well, it makes his job easier, that sort of thing. And that matters. That still matters to this day. It really does. Maybe even more so in the larger markets, because now these places, like I said, WCC had 13 people in a department in 1996. They now have 3. They have Mike Max, Tom Ryther, and weekend sportscaster. That's it in the 13th largest market in the United States. That's incredibly. I just can't believe they only have that many.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I would expect the complete opposite. I thought where that story was going is it was going to be triple by now. But if you refine and you know what works, then there you go. Interesting to know, though, because those are things as aspiring sportscasters we don't know. You make these assumptions and you could be completely wrong. So I want to bring it back a little bit when I mentioned some of the programs that you started at KUIC. Being creative and thinking outside the box to create content is a big part of what sportscasters do on a regular basis, especially in local TV where you have a lot of responsibility. What was if you could recall, what was your thought process, or how did you get to those conclusions of the type of things you wanted to pursue for content? Because, some Sports Extra, for example, and you'll tell the story, but Sports Extra is something a lot of markets do. It's just a matter of now let's see what other people are doing and let's bring it to where you work if it's not already there. But what are some other ways that you can create content?
Well, when I first got to KUIC TV, I was only hired as the weekend sports anchor. I reported news during the week. They didn't have a full-time sports person. And my goal was, I want to do sports. And I always had conversations. I was there for about a year. And because I milked cows as a kid, I knew people in the dairy industry. And a guy approached me and says, why don't you guys feature some athletes or something? I said, that's a good idea. I said, would you sponsor it? He goes, yeah, maybe we would, I brought it attention. And I'm trying to find a way to create more sports work for me so they have to hire me full time. I don't report sports during the week, not news, right? So it started with that, right? And then actually Randy Shaver at Carry 11, who's now the news guy, had started a Sports Extra the year before. And I thought, well, we should be doing that. We're more local than they are. And the same person I talked to, Dave Nixon, who was kind of my mentor, had become news director. And we had talked and I said, we need to be doing this on Friday night. And people are like, no, we can't. We only have 4 cameras. It's sports. That's why sports is at 10:25. It's number 3 on the importance. I said, I get that. But I said, on Friday night, sports is number 1. We all know that. What happens on Friday night around our small town area? Not much. It's sports. We've got to do that locally. We've got to cover that. I said, if I come up with some sort of a template of how to do this, and I can use all 4 cameras, what do you think? And Dave goes, well, sure, let's try it. So I produced the dummy show for him and said, here's where this is going to be, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, we are going to do all that? I go, yeah. I go, and we used to take 90 scores. How many scores you take now because there's less schools, but we're taking nine. How are we getting all these scores? Well, we're going to call. Well, how are we going to? I'm going to call ADs. I'm going to send letters. We're going to get people involved. This is going to be great. Find someone to make a set, and I can worry about all this. And we went on in 1987, and there were times where I wanted to stop the show because I wanted to do something else. I want to do more of a feature show. And they said, no, 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 no. We want to keep Sports Extra. That's a good brand for us. But it took a lot of selling, and it took kind of doing a dummy show to show them this is what I want to do. And for me, I just couldn't wait to cover the area. Start 45 miles out and come in. We didn't have live views like you have now. It was all going out, running back, editing, and you know this, but it is a tough night. There's so much work and so much adrenaline, and you're trying to anchor, you're shooting. You go on the set, and you're supposed to put makeup on and all that stuff. You're like, I don't know if I can. There's so many times like we're not going to get done. This is not going to finish, right? Especially during the winter when it's snowing and the roads are bad. So I started at 87, and it just sort of mushroomed. And then we started a Maverick magazine show that we did, and we were the first ones to say, hey, let's do this show at 10:15 to 10:35. Let's do an abbreviated sportscast. I had to sell that too. I said, guys, that's when people watch the news. They're not going to, we used to do it from 10. We started right away doing it from 10:35 to 11 because CBS had no programming. So they only had programming to 11. We were buying programming that said, no, let's do it now because that's when the most viewership is going to be at 10:15. And they tried it. And I don't know, you still do it at that time now in between the newscasts?
We do it in between the newscasts, but it's a 5 to 6 or 7 minute segment.
Okay.
So 1/3 of what you used to do.
Yeah. So we did 20 minutes. So we did 20 minutes, and then it developed into we did 15, and then the last 5 was a Maverick magazine show that we did on Friday, and that I did on Sunday, to sort of preview the weekend on Friday, and then show the post game stuff on Sunday night, and that was sold and stuff like that. So.
And I asked this out of curiosity. So when you say a 30-minute sports segment at a bigger,
it was 15. It was 15 to 20. Yeah.
The second half of the 30-minute newscast.
Yes.
At a bigger market, when I hear that long of a segment, I'm thinking, okay, they're ad-libbing, they're talking, they're bringing up highlights, storylines. But when I think of local TV, I'm like, well, everything's pretty straightforward. It's an intro, VO, voiceover to your highlights. Were you doing back-to-back highlights?
Yeah, we did. Yeah, we would go out. Typically, we had 4 cameras. I would get 3 games. Perry would get 2. The other photographers would get 3. I always had our prep athletes of the week. Always ran. The boy ran on Thursday. The girl ran on Friday. So that package was in the show. When it first started, we included Mankato State stuff, which was called Mankato State, then in the show. It was pretty much back-to-back highlights. But the good news is that we could go 45 seconds at least on a highlight package, where someone like Carrie Levin was only going like 1-2 highlights to get in their show. So because back then you didn't have extra channels, you didn't have digital channels where you could do the show. It all had to be on your KUIC TV. So we went from 10:15 to 10:30 to 20 minutes of stuff with a 2-minute prep, the athlete package. And then we had we usually had about 12 games. And then we would just kind of do scores in between and go to a highlight. Very seldom were we on camera. I'd come in on Wednesday and I'd write my scripts, very generic scripts, with just ins and outs, all my scoreboards. Everything was done because they had to type this stuff in on Thursday night or Friday morning because there was so much to put into the computer for the scoreboards and stuff. And then we would take scores, and then I'd always make sure I put names of kids who did well underneath the score. And we would just go out of scoreboard in the tape, out of scoreboard in the tape. It was a big game. We'd come out and have an intro to it, but it was very, very formatted because it had to be, because it was a lot. It was a big undertaking for everybody when we did it because they had not done quick hit TV like that in Mankato before. And we had, 19, 20-year-old kids in the tape room running this stuff and directing it, and they were challenged. And all those guys that have did that, they're all in the Twin Cities now doing with big jobs. All the graphics people, the directors. I mean, one of the guys who directed it, he's now directing the WCCO morning show for the past 15 years. And you knew he was going to, he was good. I mean, it pushed a lot of people, and I'm proud of that. I like it pushed me, it pushed everybody. But it was a big undertaking. It really was. And it's still going, it makes me feel good that it's still going because the area deserves it.
Absolutely. If if you were to take away one thing from that for the um, individuals interested in this business that are listening, it's the creativity. Or if you're creative, you can push for things at small markets if you want to do it. I've had similar experiences. If you want to do things, it'll take some convincing. For me, it doesn't take much convincing because digital content on social media, on websites, put whatever you want there, go ahead and air it once during the week. That doesn't harm anyone. I'm not asking too much, but my point is no matter what, you're if you have the time, if you're willing to dedicate the time, be creative and push for content at smaller stations, as all I can vouch for, that will be well received as long as you're willing to put in the work. You can't expect other people to, in your sense, you needed a whole production. But for different segments that you want to get creative with, it's just a matter of doing it yourself.
I think which is what you do. I think it would be very hard to be an anchor reporter these days because I see what you do personally. Not only you're anchoring and producing, but you're doing podcasts, you're posting stuff on social media. I don't think people understand how much time that takes because small market stations, you don't have staffs of people that do that for you. You're after you anchor a night, I would put stuff in the file tape and when we're done, but you're posting stuff, right? You're doing all this extra stuff. You have to do that today. I didn't have to worry about all the social media stuff back then. I felt like, man, I'm working 60 hours a week the way it is. Like now I got to do all this too. So I'm asking you, that must be difficult, I'm guessing, right? Trying to figure all this stuff out and plan it and get it done. Or maybe it's not, I don't know, maybe it's second nature to you now.
I think it's difficult to keep your mind active for challenging things from when you come in. Typically you're not actually coming in at 2, you're coming in for the first story to get ready. So like say 11 in the afternoon until 11 at night, you're constantly doing things that are challenging your brain. So at the end of a long day of editing, talking to people, going on air, shooting content outside or inside, when you have to buckle down at the end of your last show and post all your content, that can be mentally draining. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest tests. And you see the results. You see if you go on to, we're a small station. And for the people listening, if I'm not mistaken, there's 200 local TV stations in the United States. Yep. KUIC teeters between 198 and 199. So at a small station, the expectations are pretty comparable from what I hear to bigger markets, but the resources are more limited.
Right.
So overall, a very understanding staff that I work with. You can't accomplish what you physically can't do. So that takes a lot of stress off of me. So I feel confident in when I go into a work day. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed, but overall, it's just that longevity of having your brain tested throughout the day that I'm getting comfortable with still.
Yeah, because when you're done anchoring your last show of the night, it is such a relief. It's just like you finally have kind of time to relax your brain, but oh no, I got all this work I got to do yet, which there always is a lot of work between filing tapes, because if you don't file tapes, and that's what you learn, what people forget sometimes in our business. Like I said, I used to come in on Mondays to pick up my check. Back then you had to pick up your check, right? But I'd spend the whole first 4 hours planning my week, setting up my prep athletes of the week, getting my sports extra for next week organized, maybe filing some tapes I didn't do Sunday. It wound up being a half a day by the time I got out of there, right? And then on Tuesday night, sometimes all prep camp has to be shot on Tuesday because they can't do it on Wednesday. So you're coming on Tuesday versus Wednesday. Well, you go on Wednesday anyway because you got so much work to do, right? Come in Wednesday morning to produce all the prep sports extra, and then work Wednesday. And then Thursday night you're shooting sports, Friday night you're shooting sports, and then Saturdays, my God, on in a small station, I used to come in at 10 o'clock, write my dry scripts so I could go shoot MSU football or MSU basketball or a high school football game at 6 that happened to be on Saturday versus Friday. It's all day long, you know. Sunday was a little easier because all you're kind of doing is covering NFL and stuff like that. There's not a lot of local stuff, but I always did a plays of the week thing where I garnered all my plays and kind of wrote to something, you know. And so because I was doing extra to try and get a good resume tape to leave. I mean, because you have to leave at some point in time. You can't do small markets forever. It would kill you, to be honest with you. It's hard, but it is great, great, great training. And it needs, and I'm seeing that now. I'm telling you right now, Mary, when I work with people as a freelancer, if I'm working with someone who's done digital all their life versus news, it is automatic. I know for sure that person does news and has done it. And I see a big difference. The news experience to me is still key. It's huge. And I see it. Just the know-how, the savviness, the work ethic, how you listen to people when they answer questions. It's different. It's better. It's a step up than if you're going against someone in a job who's done something for either a team or just digital stuff. The news experience, bar none, is the best. It truly is, regardless of where you work at.
I would agree. And initially, when I started working at KUYC right out of college, I had offers for weekend sports anchor positions, but KUYC was the one MMJ position.
Yep.
And I accepted that because I liked the area and I enjoyed Minnesota because I went to Iowa State. So being in the Midwest in general was somewhere that I was comfortable staying. And I was so insecure about being an MMJ as an aspiring sportscaster. I was like, I was very vocal about, and these are things you learn as you develop in the professional world, is making sure you keep certain things to yourself. But I was vocal about how this is not my strong suit, writing about news. I'm a sports person, but I'm here dedicating my time and I'm working towards that. Everyone knew that. So then eventually the weekend news anchor position opened up and I was like stressed out. Is this going to affect whether or not I'm going to be in sports, or are people going to see me as just a news person? I couldn't fathom people seeing me as news and not sports, but that's what the Mankato community knew me as. And I eventually got comfortable with that because no matter what, which I eventually learned in sports, the fundamentals that you learn at a news station are so important. And whether it doesn't matter what you're talking about, it is all the tools. If you're talking about a garden event, with shooting that and making that interesting and all of that is equal to the sports world because there's a lot of games that aren't that intriguing. But moving on from that, I really want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, which is mentorship.
Yeah.
Having mentors is something that I've struggled with a lot since being a professional, because I think of the people that, really understand the business kind of guiding you throughout all of what you do. But when you're in a market where everyone is helpful, but no one, like you had an experience with someone you refer to as a mentor, which I think is a very potent description for someone. In the cases where you don't have that, that can be, have you ever had an experience where you were just kind of thrown in and you didn't have someone guiding you along the way? Because that's a very valuable thing.
I did. And, I'll be honest with you. My first experience at KYC TV, when I was an internship there, I was a go-getter. I went there every day. I did everything I needed. But when I was thrown on the air as an intern 3 weeks into my internship because they had who was a friend of mine, they let this guy go. Perry was there. Perry couldn't do it, and they asked me to do it. I was not ready. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't really. I had not done anchoring at that level. Plus, just learning how things worked in the control room. I didn't know any of that yet. But I was told. I said, well, I have to do this. If I don't do it, what are they going to think of me? This is my chance to say, hey, I can do this. Blah blah blah. I did. I was on for 3 weekends, but I did not do a good job. I mean, I didn't know. I didn't have any help. Just how to run the new. They weren't computers, but they were typewriters that were a little bit different. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff. I didn't. We didn't have. We didn't have. We had no teleprompter, which I had in college, which I had not anchored without teleprompter before, believe it or not. So you didn't have any help. I had so much help in college. When you're in college, you have all these people that want to do stuff, and you have your job for the day, and you can just do that. Now I'm doing everything, and I want to do well. I was nervous as all get out because I knew, as prepared as I was with my stuff, I was not prepared to anchor, and I did not do well. And they told me after my internship, they said, "Well, we don't think there's this job open. We want you to report, but we don't see you as an anchor." I said, "You know what?" I said that I told them, I said, that was a very unfair situation for me. I said, if I was in a position, I think, where someone could mentor me and show me how to be on air and how to work the system. I didn't know how to work all the technology they had, which wasn't very much, but it was enough to make you, not feel good about yourself. But I had to say, I got to do it. I have to do it. Right. In the end, then I did some practice runs with help from this Dave Nixon, this Doug Miller. And it was like the light bulb went on. It's like, this is what you do. This is how you look down and up from the monitor. This is how you smile. You got to, and I anchored in college, but it was different now. It was different. There's pressure. It's a job. You're getting paid. You have to look good, right? It's not play TV anymore, right? And that, and so I had some other issues where I had when I got to MSC that were different, where I was doing sideline stuff, which I'd never done before and did not understand the inner workings of live television through a truck, but I wasn't versed enough in. But there is an element in this business where you're going to get thrown in and you got to do the best you can. There is. The fact that you said yes is great. I mean, that's still in the end what you had to do, right? But you worry about, oh, now am I ever going to go back to sports? Am I ever going to, which is one of the reasons why I decided I don't want to do this. I don't want to do news. I want to do sports. So I started creating things to get into it. But the mentorship is huge in this business. Like I said, then I didn't get a lot of it at KYC TV because there wasn't a lot of experience there to mentor me. And some of the people there weren't interested in mentoring me because it's just who they were. It's no fault of theirs. So I had to seek it out, and I would have to travel to the Twin Cities and talk to people that I wanted to be like, to say, what would you write here? I learned so much more about writing from these people than anything else, or how they approach writing something. That's stuff I wasn't taught in college, and writing is still huge. And even though we do it on a daily basis, like you do it on a daily basis, we're so pressured to just do meat and potatoes type writing to get us in and out of tapes and stuff, that until you get a package, you don't get a chance to really concentrate on it. But these guys taught me a lot, but I had to seek it out. And that was Monday trips going to the Twin Cities where my friends were anyway. So it was nice to be able to see friends, and I always make a visit to a TV station. I just always did. And at least bi-weekly I probably did, and that helped a ton because it built a relationship, and they taught me things about how to write and how to present myself in order to make my product better. Because the one thing good about Mankato, I don't know if you can now yet, I could watch all the Twin Cities TV stations in Mankato and watch them and see how they did things and get to know who they are. So when I approached them, I said, I watch your stuff. You've done this. I thought that story was cool. Teach me how to do that. And so that's what I did. But it is, and I know, I'm glad you recognize that, because you do need it, because it's different. I mean, in college, I've seen some stuff you've done in college. I know you've done everything, right? You've done play-by-play, you've done sideline, but until you're in the real world with it, you don't really know how it works, because college is different. You have so many people helping you. You go to a Mankato, you're by yourself. You do everything, right? How do you get to that next level? You need coaches, you need mentors. We all do. We do to this. I do to this day yet.
When I give advice to college students that ever reach out to me, few and far between, but when I give advice and they ask me, how do you approach a stand up or how do you think of interview questions for an athlete? I tell them my approach, but I make sure they understand a lot of there's there's not a whole there are rights and wrongs in the business without a doubt, especially in local TV, but your approach is kind of what makes you unique as a
Right.
reporter. It's your instinct. Individuals that have a very good instinct or way of approaching those things make it far in the business because it comes natural to them. So I say for me, approaching a stand up and my reasoning is what works for me, but it's not the yes or no. Although what makes that challenging to understand is there is a foundation for all of the stuff that we do, like a general skeleton of how to do things that is nice to learn. And it's very comforting to hear you say going to a really prestigious journalism school in St. Cloud State, but still not having learned some of the fundamentals. That's
Right.
that's where people feel very lost in the workplace that I've seen new reporters come in at the station. It's like, why didn't I learn this in college? Well, one, it's your responsibility to go online and figure it out because we have a lot of resources and ask people. But another thing is it's if you don't have that mentor there to also kind of spoon feed it to you, sometimes it feels like then you are at a disadvantage to people that do have that mentor on
And
hand.
it does hit home more when someone who's done it can tell you, I'm not telling you how to do it, but this worked for me, right? And if there's one thing that I think that held me back as an anchor, especially early on, is that I think I was afraid. I was taught so much by the book because television is such a formatted industry. The do's and don'ts back in the day were like, you have to write this way, you have to present your story this way. Um, you've got to be this reporter. You don't want to show if you're leaning this way or that way. You've got to be so kind of even keel. Well, none of those rules apply anymore. And
Mm-mm.
I think what I struggled with early on is that um, I wasn't. I don't know if I was comfortable enough with myself. In the end, you still have to be you and be liked for you. You can't be somebody else on TV. And I was always this kind of person. I was always kind of a by the book. I'm a rule follower in general. By the book and how you present TV, blah, blah, blah. Well, in the end, almost anything goes in TV. I mean, you can kind of present your story as long as the story, people get the gist of the story. But I always, this is bizarre to me. And I don't know if, did you get a chance to ever meet Sid Hartman? You know who Sid Hartman is? You only been in the market for a couple of years. He passed away
No.
last year. A legendary, crusty old man who beat everybody in every story. And when you meet him, he is just absolute. He doesn't care who he is on TV. He'll tell you to go to hell. You know, but for some reason that's endearing to people. He never cared if people liked him or not. He was who he was. He didn't know he was being himself. And I was always cognizant, well, how do I need to be on TV? In the end, you've got to be yourself. And if people like you, they do. If they don't, they don't. But if you're not, and it took me a long time to feel that way, to say, just
Yeah.
be me and don't be this person that you're taught to be in this business. Because in the end, there's so many people are going to like you or not. You can be the best reporter in the world, the best anchor in the world, but if people don't like what you wear that day, they just don't like what you wear that day. And that's a facet of our business that's never going to go away.
That's so important because I tell people when I was an aspiring sportscaster in middle school and high school, I critiqued every female sportscaster on
Yeah.
TV to every single thing they said from the moment they were put on TV to when they got off. And a lot of it had to do with how their knowledge came across and authenticity. And a lot of I would say like those are things I don't want to do. I was very critical. But now that I'm in the position, it's really hard for me to kind of get my personality across. And I see some really amazing people that I work with, and I don't see their personality come across on TV either. So it's nice to know that it takes time, and that's what can really help someone stand out, is if you are able to just be authentic, be who you are, and knowing your own identity is a whole nother thing within itself, that it seems like you were able to identify pretty early on, but some people,
It's
struggle.
it's hard though when you grow up from a Midwestern background. You're just supposed to be this
Mm,
proper, respectful, and we all need to be that way. But it's just you're always kind of taught not to put yourself out there, be overly humble, uh, don't be cocky, don't you truly let your personality go that you might be around, right?
mhm.
For you, there's a person that I know very, very well who I love to death is Marnie Gellner. If you watch Marnie on Bally Sports North and stuff, Marnie is so natural on TV. It just comes across. And that is who she is. That's why I deem her as being so good at what she does. She's an extremely good writer, but when she's on TV, she's not afraid to make mistakes. She smiles. That is who she is. I can't explain it anymore. It's like when you see Marnie, what not on TV, that is who she is. And she's always been comfortable with just being that, and it works, and she's not. And I know other people who are afraid to be that person, and they would be so much better if they would. But it's a hard thing to crack. But she's natural at it, and
Mhm.
and I think at some point in time, people make a conscious decision. I'm just going to be who I am and say screw it, right? But it's hard. She does a good job of that.
Pat Fischer, I have you for 5 more minutes. If I could ask you one more question, you are a full time freelance television producer. Freelancing is something we hear a lot that people in the television business do, but one, why did you go the freelance route, and what does your position all entail in terms of finding stability and job opportunities?
I went freelance route because I knew that on-air anchoring was probably not going to be my gig. I wanted to stay in Minnesota. My wife was traveling back and forth to Europe. We had just had our third kid. I was traveling back and forth to Wisconsin and Milwaukee and Madison, doing a lot of the Wisconsin side stuff. We had three kids in daycare. Fox had just bought us. I spent a year being the Twins and Brewers pregame reporter, but most in Milwaukee. We couldn't manage it all. And we had no interest in moving anymore because our kids were in school. So in the end, I went to Fox and said, I knew they weren't interested in me anyway, being an anchor anymore. They wanted to get younger. And I knew all that discussions with them. So I went freelance. I stayed home during the summers, watched my kids, started coaching baseball, basketball, football. My wife was able to travel. The daycare issue, we were saving money on daycare, and the stress out of our family life just went like this. I never ever thought that I'd be freelancing for this many years. My freelance started, I was producing shows. I was producing a lot of Gopher hockey shows. I was still doing stories. I still do stories for Bally, but that has diminished more and more as the industry has changed so much. I shoot more now than I ever have. I wish I did more stories because that's still my love. So the fact that I've been able to do this and it's worked for our family, and for 17 straight years, I worked weekends as an anchor reporter. And all of a sudden, I had a little bit more of a life. And when you get older and you have kids, it's enticing. It's nice. I still work a lot of weekends, but I can kind of make that call. The industry is freelance up here, though, to a degree. Even a lot of our reporters at Valley, they're freelance. They're really an employee, but it's freelance because there's so many things you have to schedule. You couldn't keep people on to do all these games and stuff. So the news industry is not freelance, but the industry I am with live television sports, it's mostly freelance. So it's sort of worked out for me. And I still have this niche where I can still do interviews with athletes, meet athletes, do stories. I have that mix. If I lost all of that, I don't know how much longer I would stay in it. But it's just worked out. I've been freelance for 20 years now, more than I was an anchor reporter. And for our family life, it just worked. And we're so very lucky in that regard. and I still can cover all the sports. I'm at Vikings, I'm at Wild. I love the diversity of covering all the sports. I really do. It'd be hard just to cover one thing all the time. So I like to get out and talk and see people. So that's the other part. I'm out of the office, you know. Love that a part of our job. We're out of the office.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself with us, Pat Fischer. An honor to talk to you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You take care.